In this section, I will talk about different factors that you will need to consider when planning your data collection modality. These factors include the structure of the data itself. They relate to the physical location. Will the study personnel need to meet face-to-face with the subjects, or will the data be collected remotely? And finally, whether the data already exists and you are reusing existing data, or whether you need to capture data from scratch. The classic form with which clinical research data has been captured is the case report form. And this usually consists of a small set of well-defined data elements, such as the elements you would find on a web form in your browser or on a paper survey. Data is typically entered by the study subjects or study personnel either into paper format or into an electronic data capture format. Notice that when the data is captured into an electronic format, for it to be analyzed, it will still need to be transcribed into the electronic format as well. It's considered bad practice to enter data directly into spreadsheets or into database software. It's always intuitive and less likely to have errors if you use a structured form. Another type of data that you will capture are complex machine captured data. And these are digital, but they are not as easy to interpret as case report forms. And these could be the results or the tracings of biometric or physiological measurements, such as electronic, such EEG or EKG, or image files that are captured from radiology or histology studies. This kind of data is electronically stored as large machine-readable binary files, and you will need to annotate your study database with the correct markers to point to these files. Sometimes you will need to capture unstructured data, for example, during subject interviews or observations. And in these kinds of interactions, data is typically captured via recording or videotaping or note-taking. Then this data is transcribed into text that can then be entered or stored electronically into large unstructured blobs of text. You can impose structure on this kind of data by coding. And so sometimes study personnel would go in and extract data or just realize that certain parts of the text can be coded in a certain manner. And this way, the results of this kind of coding can be extracted and entered into the database itself. The second factor relates to the physical location. If you are meeting in person or if you're doing in-person data collection, it's important to know the context. Is it a dedicated study visit, or are you collecting, or is the study data being captured as part of a different process? So for example, are you capturing patients during a routine clinical visit? And another context that's important is to identify who will be doing the data entry. Is the patient going to be doing the data entry him or herself, or study personnel will be doing that for them? This may impact your choice and design of forms. Forms that are entered once by patients or study subjects, for example, will need to be simple and intuitive, whereas study personnel can be maybe able to use more complex forms because they will just have to learn how to use them once, and then once that learning curve is overcome, then they can efficiently capture the same data over and over from multiple study subjects. When you're capturing data remotely, this could be done via a paper form, such as a survey, where the subjects will just fill in the blanks. Another format would be you can sort of automate the process by using bubbles or scannable forms, like the scannable exam forms. Or you can also use optical character recognition, where the data can be entered by the subjects into these forms by using just handwriting, and then there exists software now that can identify and digitize that content. Sometimes you can also use electronic data capture, as we've mentioned before, and the means with which this can, the transport of that could be either via a browser, and this requires internet access, or you can deploy specialized data collection software to the site or to the study subjects or to the site of data collection, where the software provides the interface, and then the transport could be part of that software process. You can capture data by phone. There are interactive voice response systems, or an SMS. You can establish an SMS dialogue where there exist systems the patients can provide answers via their SMS messages in a menu or structured format, and then that would all be automatically entered into your research data set. When collecting data remotely, it's important also to take into account the security of the data collection and the transfer pipe back to your database. If you are collecting sensitive patients, such as protected health information, then that factor is very important. The third factor that you will need to take into account when choosing your data collection modality is whether you're collecting data from scratch or whether you are reusing existing data. Notice when you are reusing existing data, it's less important to worry about data capture and more important to worry about data extraction from that existing source. A source of information that is typically reused for clinical research is the medical record or the electronic medical record. Data in the electronic medical record can exist either in a structured format, for example, tables of lab values that can be automatically extracted, transformed, and then loaded into your study database. However, there exist portions of the medical record, such as clinical notes that are written down by the healthcare providers, that consist of unstructured text. To capture that data requires abstraction by experts and coders, and these are professionals that can understand the clinical terminology and identify the portions or the units of information that are needed for the study. When deciding to reuse existing data from the medical record, it's very important to know whether you have the right access, whether you have the rights to access the medical record, and also it's important for that to be done by personnel who are knowledgeable with clinical documentation. Notice that even in this context, unstructured data can be somewhat automated using information extraction techniques like natural language processing, which can identify facts or assertions made in natural text, and then those facts or assertions are then translated into structured information types that are then loaded into your database, into your study database. Another source of information that can be reused for clinical research is data that exists from previous studies. The considerations you will need, so in that case the study has been collected and exists in well-maintained study databases, or hopefully well-maintained databases. The considerations you will need to have before reusing that data is whether you do have permission, whether you can have access, and how can you have access to that data. And finally, research design considerations. The context of studies may be different, and replicating the same context from one study to the other may not be straightforward, so the applicability of the data or the interpretation of that data may be different in the two settings. But other than that, it's a relatively straightforward extraction mechanism. Finally, you can reuse data that exists in public health registries or other publicly available data. When extracting data from these sources, it's important to be assured or to be aware of the data quality, the level of completeness of those data sources, and how those data sources will need to be transformed so that they can match your study design and the corresponding database structure that you have. So to recap, I've just described the following factors that do affect your choice of data collection modality. The structure, these are factors that relate to the structure of your data, the location, whether study personnel will need to meet with your subjects or whether data is collected remotely, and finally, whether you are reusing existing data or whether you're collecting data from scratch.